3, 2, 1.
You're now watching two old farts making noises.
Well, that is very apropos now. Vicky, you
Yeah.
can do that because I cannot do that. So let me just anybody who's listening.
Who cannot, David? Can you do it?
I cannot do that.
No,
I can do
I
both hands.
can't do.
Couple of
I
rubber
can't do
bands.
much. I can't do much at my age. It's
He might break a fist
David's,
or something.
that's right. David's envious of a stiff wind, just so we're clear.
yeah. Well,
So
no. Actually, to be honest, I'm actually quite envious of the word long and prosper. But there you
Yes.
go. That's another story. Yeah.
okay, there you go.
Yeah. So
Anyway,
come on,
so
wake up,
today's
everybody.
today's a special show. We have Vicky from Social Intercourse. We have, of course,
Hi,
Brown
Vicky.
Car Guy from Sermon on the German and Brown Car Guy. And today we thought we would geek out for all the guys that are living in the basement, still at their mother's house when they're 50, and they can talk about Star Trek. I was about to say Star Wars. And we're going to talk about Star Trek because we've touched on it so many times. Vicky's a big nerd. I don't know if she has her Klingon mug yet. And then Gerard, as we know, loves it. He's got a jacket. He's got this. He's got that. So we're going to let them geek out today on Star Trek. So guys, this is all you. And as you can, people that are listening can't see, but behind David, he has every Star Trek doll.
That's right.
That's
Who have you
Yeah.
got?
There we go.
You've got Uhura there. I think you've got Kirk.
Real people. Thought they were real people that
I
had
think
come into my
Rose is
room.
behind it, maybe.
I don't think that's Kirk. I
Oh,
think
there's
that's
Spock.
Oh, there's
There's
Spock.
Spock,
And there's
then
McCoy.
Bones.
I
There's
think
Scotty, and that guy.
Bones back there, and there's Scotty. Yeah, brilliant,
Yeah.
brilliant.
Who's the guy in the yellow? That can't be Kirk. Is that Kirk?
I think it's meant to be Kirk, but it's
I think so.
angry,
Because
Really?
he's got the yellow.
angry
yellow.
Kirk.
Yeah, it's angry. It's like the Kirk that slept with the green alien. It's the green alien.
I think
Kirk.
I'll just do the show like this. I think.
Yeah,
That's
perfect.
right.
That's fine. Yeah.
Don't ruin
Thank you,
it.
Vicky. Thank you, Vicky. Don't ruin it.
No,
Send
David,
with
you've never
love,
looked
David.
better.
Send with love.
Oh, dear.
Yes, I know. I can feel the love.
Yeah, I
All
was
way
telling the
from
guys
Austin.
yesterday on our show that I have a mug that it just has the Enterprise on it, and then when you pour hot water into it, this
Yes.
Klingon bird of prey appears. Have you seen that? And I can't find it anywhere. I think the aliens took it. They were jealous
No,
because I
you
turned my
know-
house upside down.
You know, I have it again. I should have. I got a lot of stuff that's actually still in boxes and in storage and stuff like that. But I do have a mug which is exactly like yours, and it changes.
Ah.
But what it does, it's got the transporter pad.
Oh, perfect.
So basically, when you put water in it, they either appear or they disappear off the
Disappear.
transporter pad. So that's how that works. Yeah.
So cool. So cool. Yeah, I'm upset. Oh, thank you.
Things are going on.
That's the best sound effect ever.
Oh. He's
But
just
you
saying
know,
that before the show, I got to listen to it for 20 minutes.
Through a number of different things, they literally just dropped the glitter paper and filmed it, at different speeds and stuff like that to try and get that original transporter effect,
Wow, it's amazing how low tech some of it was, right?
It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. I mean, the thing is,
Star
And that was in the late 60s.
it's something that I remember from my childhood, obviously watching the original series. And when you think about Star Trek and equivalent stuff at the time, so for example, I was a big fan of Doctor Who as well. That was very much a UK science fiction thing, the Time Lord, And when you look at the stories, when you look at the sets, they're terrible. And I think there's a joke about it in Galaxy Quest, which is kind of like the alternative Star Trek or a spoof Star Trek movie, which Star Trek is actually love. But the thing about the sets they were just terrible. They would literally just fall apart. They were just literally just cardboard cutouts or painted backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
But the great thing about them is what captured the imagination of the characters and the storytelling. And I think that's what has ingrained Star Trek into the passions and loves of so many fans. That it's just the stories were so compelling and the characters were so amazing. And there's just the notion of like humans going out into space and discovering stuff. It was just brilliant,
Are you going to tell me now that those doors the doors on the Enterprise didn't actually work?
I think there were people there just sliding them back and forth.
With ropes.
Oh,
Yeah, there were people with pulleys. There were people with
There were
pulleys that would
bubble
make
as
them do it,
burst
and then
now.
they added the shh. The shh was a
right.
guy actually
Right.
in the microphone. When they would add it in later, when they would dub it, they would go. Shh. They made the door noise. But was if you think about Star Trek though, it first aired, I want to say, in the late '60s. Was taken off by I think 1969, 1970, right? 3 years.
Yeah.
And in the '80s, they did the first Star Trek movie with the original cast, and then they did like two more. The one that didn't do well was, where Spock's making love to a whale and Kirk's like saving the world again.
I love
But-
that one, by the way. Anyway, continue.
Okay, that's a great flick for all three people that
The
saw it.
whale wasn't
But-
very happy, but there you go.
I mean, the whale wasn't happy. There's a lawsuit. But what was interesting? What was interesting? It was
The
a Me
whale
Too
was
movement.
very woke. I think that was the problem.
Right. But what was interesting
What was
after
the name
that?
of the whale? What was the name of the whale? See, I should know.
There was
It's
a
on-
name. The
it's on
whale
the-
had a name.
Yeah.
Gracie and was it Gracie
on-
and something, wasn't it?
No, it's
was
on the
crazy.
affidavit. It's on the affidavit. You can read it.
Yes,
So-
it was crazy. And Gracie was pregnant. Yes.
Yes, that's
Right,
right.
right.
Yes.
Well, the interesting
From
thing is,
Spock.
from those three movies, then you got, I think it was Star Trek, The Next Generation,
Yeah.
Next
with
Generation.
Picard and all those people. And all of a sudden, what really turned out to be a 3-year kind of throwaway season, I think, for NBC, became now this global sensation where, like, they've got 50 iterations of Star Trek. It's a whole thing,
Yeah,
which is,
I had to study it in college in my media classes. It became
of
like
course,
a
'cause that's what they do in school.
well,
No, hang on a minute. Did you study Star Trek at college?
yeah. Well, I mean, it wasn't a class, but it was in one of my media classes, and they talked
Oh,
about
wow.
how he pitched it, how Gene Roddenberry pitched it as Wagon Train in Space, so he could get it sold,
Oh,
and
wow.
all that kind of stuff. We had to study like how. Because we were learning about pitching and what sold and what goes and all that kind of stuff, and that was one of the big examples. So
I think
Yeah.
you've touched on something I think that is very interesting there, and I think it's core to Star Trek in the sense that if you think at the time in the 1960s, and you went like, I'm going to do a science fiction show, and they were like, no, we're not having that, and he was like, no,
right.
it's wagon trails, cowboys in space. That's
In
what it is.
space, yeah.
And it's wagon trails, and that's what the Enterprise is. But then, of course, he had to overcome so many hurdles. If you think about it, I'm talking about Gene Roddenberry, which a lot of people will know is the creator of Star Trek, quite a visionary of his time, and he came up with all these concepts and all these ideas and all these notions of how he imagined the future to be. But unlike the reason that I love Star Trek so much, and I love all science fiction, I love Star Wars. Let's be honest, I love Star Wars as well. But I love Star Trek in particular, and the reason I do that is because there was an optimism in his view of the future. And I think that was
Right.
distinct to Star Trek. Whereas a lot of things, they look at a post-apocalyptic future, or they look at the crazy scenarios, or robots have taken over, or the Terminator, or whatever. But Star Trek was a vision of hope. It was always a vision of hope. It was always a vision of optimism. It was always like, this is what humanity could do. This is where we could be. And I think that as a kid growing up, it was like, wow, I mean, okay, maybe not when I grew up, but as a kid, you run wild with your imagination, right? But you thought, oh, wow, that could happen. We could be those people. And as you see the picture behind David there with all the main characters of the original series. And if you look at that, you see an alien on the bridge, and you see, a black woman on the bridge. And the woman's not just, there, she's an officer. She is one of the bridge officers. She's on it. And to have that at that time, and then to introduce a Russian onto it and all of this sort of stuff, it was just, and obviously Sulu's character as well. It was just groundbreaking. It was just like nothing that had ever been done or seen before. And reading other stuff that I read in the past, being the Star Trek nerd that I am, there are stories about how he had to overcome hurdles and how he had to overcome issues and things. And I think there at the conversation, I remember that Sulu, the character that plays Sulu, had there was an interview with him, and they said, why wasn't Sulu gay in the original series? And he said, I had that conversation with Gene Roddenberry at the time. He said, Gene was like, look, it's just not going to happen. He said, I'm pushing it as far as I can, but it's just not going to happen.
Right.
Pick your battle.
But it's just the belief that all these disparate humans from different, cultures and backgrounds and aliens and whatever could go together into space aboard the Starship Enterprise.
There we go. There we go.
Bring out the stuff. Bring out your stuff.
There it is. There it is.
I don't want to be a bit.
Unfortunately, I've only got.
I don't want to appear if I'm a bit slow on the uptake, but I and I'm not being facetious, but this Zulu guy was he actually a gay character? Was
No.
that
He was
the
not. He
very-
was not. He has subsequently been portrayed as a gay character, for example, in the reboot movie series. That was, I think, 2009. In fact, this Starship Enterprise is actually from the reboot movie series 2009. And in that, Sulu was portrayed as a gay character, in deference to, the actor himself also being obviously gay and having come out many, many years ago. But the reality was that he did kind of hope that he could do that in the show. But at that time, they were just like, no, this is just, we're trying to do what we can do here. But just the fact that they managed to have all of these characters and all these personalities and tell all these stories. And some of the stories are really hard hitting. Like, I can't remember the episode names. And maybe, Vicky, you could remember them.
No. I was like, I hope Shiraz doesn't ask me the episode names because I brought my cheat sheets.
Oh, you got cheat sheet. Brilliant. So you know the one
Well, a little bit.
they've got the half face is black and half face is white. And then there's two
Yes.
just because they're colored on the opposite sides. I mean, if you look at it, it looks pretty childish. It looks the makeup is terrible. But when you listen to the story and when you try to understand what it's trying to say, it's just mind blowing stuff, And this is a story they were telling way back in the 60s. It's incredible.
Yeah, stories about war and racism and all that stuff.
Didn't Kirk actually kiss
It was actually famously the first interracial kiss on television.
Kiss on screen.
Yeah.
And he also kissed the green alien. He kissed the green alien lady.
He kissed anything out there.
He kissed everything. It didn't really
He's
matter.
Space STD guy. Yeah, pretty much.
So I remember there was a big hoo-ha, wasn't there, when one of the Planet of the Apes movies came out, when I think at the end of that one of the female ape character got kissed.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of hoo-ha.
Oh, really?
So,
yeah, but again, the Planet of the Apes, I remember as a kid, and I just used to love that film. But, the end of that film was such a shocker. I mean, we're talking about the original Charlton Heston movie,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The end of the movie is just such a shocker with that revelation of the Statue of Liberty and, damn you all to hell. And it's just a perfect example of how you have all these, they'll have all these, doom and gloom scenarios that we've always depicted in the future. And of course, science fiction is slightly meant to be like that. Science fiction is supposed to present a mirror back to humanity and say, look, if we go down this route, we could end up like that. If we go down this route, we could end up like that. And to be fair, that science fiction should do that. It's an opportunity to look into the future and see where we're going. But the great thing about Star Trek was that it did both of that. It went into the future and it looked at where we could end up. But at the same time, it looked at what we could achieve as humanity and what we could do if we all just come together, and work together and think in a way that is about the positivity of society rather than greed and corruption and all the rest of it. So I am really.
Are there any evil versions of Star Trek
in this interview? Because otherwise, I'm just going to keep going and going and going.
You're good. Yeah, keep going.
Keep going.
I was wondering, was there any really dark episodes? Really sort of
Oh, sure.
You're talking about it being all positive. So what about the
It's
other
a
side?
positive vision of the future, but not every episode is positive, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, there are things like the Mirror Universe where they got to explore the dark side of their personalities and stuff like that. But later Star Trek obviously got much darker because you had things. One of my favorite series is DS9, Deep Space Nine, and you had Captain Sisko on there, who was the first black captain in the series, right? And there were several episodes that were around him, which were absolutely extraordinary. There's one episode where he kind of has, he physically or psychologically, he ends up in history, where he's actually a writer. He's actually a science fiction writer in, I think, 50s or 60s America. And he's imagining DS9. And to be honest, like me as a wannabe writer, I related so much to that, and the racism that he experienced and what he went through. For somebody like me growing up in the UK in the 70s, like I felt everything that he said and did, and all the nuances and everything, all the aspects of what he felt and what he went through. I felt every bit of that. And then you had other episodes where, for example, there is Sisko where there's again, this is really nerdy now, but there's the whole Cardassian Dominion War thing going on and all the rest of it, right? There's a whole episode where he records, the whole episode is him just recording his log. He's just recording his log. And in the log, he's confessing that he's complicit in the murder of a Vulcan ambassador and in manipulating politics in order to get the result he desired, which was to get Starfleet involved in this war. And so that it's a really, for Star Trek, that's a really dark episode, because he basically talks about how politics works, and and you go, what's the cost of peace? And if it's the life of one Vulcan ambassador, you know what, I can live with it. So it's one of those things where it explores so many of these themes. And the latest series that we're watching now, which is Strange New Worlds, has also gone down that route. In a couple of episodes back, it was actually quite a disturbing episode, because it revolved around Dr. Mbenga, who's the Starship Doctor on the Enterprise. And apparently he's got a past, and he was in the war with Klingons. And this Klingon ambassador comes onto the ship in a very Starfleet way. You always do things right, and the Klingon ambassador is under the protection of the Starship Enterprise, and it has to be ultimately in that series. And again, I'm sorry, because there's going to be spoilers in this, so anybody that hasn't seen it, block your ears right now. But without trying to give away too much, but it takes a very, very dark and very un-Star Trek turn in that series. And what Dr. Mbenga does is actually quite shocking. And so, but again, it's an exploration. In that particular instance, it was an exploration of post-war trauma and PTSD and stuff like that. So, it's incredible how through these stories you can, I got to say, I learned so much about life through watching Star Trek, which is kind of sad. But let's be honest, you do, because it takes you in so many different directions.
Right.
Yeah,
for sure. And it sparked a lot of debate too about got people talking about those issues and talking about, things, difficult themes that they were introduced. I mean, there was also tribbles. It wasn't all, you didn't hurt your brain every time you watched, but they had some lighthearted moments.
There's lots of fun episodes.
I'm still recovering from the fact that you said the Kardashians were in it. I mean, wow.
Come on. Everybody knew those girls were aliens.
They're still around in the 24th century, apparently. So
they're half plastic, so why not?
Wild.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, wow, the Kardashians in Star Trek. Beam me up, Scott.
Let me ask you. Let me ask this. So, from the 1969 series to where the movies are with Chris Pine, to where the television stuff is, if you have to pick 2 or 3 of your favorites, is it the television series because it touches? Well, no, hold on. Is it the television series because they can touch on a myriad of topics, and is it the one from the 60s, or it is 9, or is it whatever, or is it one of the movies because it's just it's all encompassing and tries to, solve the world's problems in 90, as Mel Brooks would say, I got to solve everything in 90 minutes. And 3 minutes of that is credits. So, so.
Very good.
The Schwartz be with you.
Vicky, you want to take that first?
Gosh. Am I picking the actual series that I like the best, or an episode?
You could pick whether it's the movies, whether it's the original series, whether it's The Next Generation, Deep Sea Nine, whatever it might be, or one of the movies. Out of all the Star Trek, when you look at whatever it is, I know there's a lot of work there. When do you go and go, that's the best out of everything they've done from the beginning to today?
My favorite is Next Generation.
Okay.
I'm a Picard, Riker groupie.
You like the bald guys. Okay, I got it.
I mean, I even watched Picard. Well, I watched the first 2 seasons of Picard. And then it went in a weird place I didn't really care for, so I stopped watching it. But I just love. I was a fan of his before he was even on the show, and it was kind of touching a little bit on what Taraz said. But they got these actors, these Shakespearean actors, these people that are classically trained. It wasn't like some schlocky show where they do this acting. When the ship is going and they're bouncing around. These guys had acting chops. They had to do that, but it was also to tackle these sort of themes and plots. They were very famous classical actors, and so I think that was my perfect cast. I loved the plot. I loved, I started with the first the original series because my brothers made me watch it. I had to do everything they did, so that was my first. So that would be my second favorite, and then the movies. I love parts of some of them. Some of them, I could pick and choose my favorite parts of those. And as it kind of went on further, I got less and less. I saw the first Chris Pine movie. It was okay. I just don't really like the reboots. I'm not a fan of reboots in general. I think it's lazy, but I know a lot of people like that now, but that's not me. Take it away.
No. I completely get that. I think it's a generational thing as well. Obviously, So I revealing my age, I was born in 1968, so it's 2 years after actually Star Trek started, and then over here in the UK, we got obviously the repeats or the reruns, as you would call them, and obviously then I grew up on those. So to me, it's all that there's always going to be an affection for the original series, the original series. And I do remember that obviously then that went away, and then we had nothing, and then the movies came along, and then I loved the movies. This was the original, William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy movies. And then of course Next Generation came along. And I got to be honest, I was one of those people that said, no, how can another crew be on the Enterprise? That's just wrong, So I literally refused to watch it. I actually refused to watch that. So I didn't watch the first 2 seasons of it.
Super nerd.
I get it though, because I get it.
Yeah. No. But then what happened is you're sitting there, you're channel hopping, and on comes this scene of Captain Picard on the bridge, and Captain Picard is doing what Patrick Stewart would do. And to be fair, just to point out, William Shatner was also a Shakespearean actor, believe it or not.
Yeah. Oh no, all of them. Yeah, it wasn't just
a very bad one.
That's right.
Yeah. But Captain Picard is there, and I see this, and he's delivering a soliloquy. He's being Shakespeare on the bridge of the Enterprise.
Yeah, I remember that one.
My hair stood up. You know what I mean? It's literally like when you have that guy, that actor in particular, delivering the lines the way he does when he's on it. I was like, oh my God, what am I missing out on? You know what I mean?
The FOMO.
I was just entranced, So at that point, then I went back and I watched. And to be fair, the first series of Next Generation wasn't that great, but from the second series,
it wasn't
that great. From the second series onwards, it really, really got good. And I would just say, Vicky, that I completely understand where you're coming from with Picard season 1 and 2. They were tough going. They were really tough going. However, you've got to watch season 3 because season 3 is the payoff.
Go back? Okay, all right.
Season 3 is the payoff. Season 3 is what it's all been leading to. And season 3, there's a meme that's going around at the moment. And again, this is a bit Star Wars, Star Trek. There's a meme going around at the moment because obviously then they brought Han Solo back and they brought Princess Leia back, and in the later movies, right, in the newer movies. So there's a meme going around where there's a picture of the Millennium Falcon, and they've got all the oldies on the bridge, but it never actually happened. So somebody's obviously photoshopped it, and it says that what Star Wars fans wanted, because we wanted to see Han Solo and Princess Leia and Wookiee and Luke Skywalker. We wanted to see them all on the Millennium Falcon, but it never happened. And then with Picard season 3, there's a picture of all the guys on the bridge of not the Enterprise E, but the Enterprise D, which is the one that was in the Next Generation TV series. And it's like, and what Star Trek fans got. And literally season 3 is what you hoped for, and it's what you got, and it's a real tearjerker as well. So it's brilliant. Okay. But you definitely need to watch that. In answer to your question, Stephen, which is the favorite, I have to cheat. I mean, like you said, there's over 600 plus hours of Star Trek content. Over the years, and I've got to say I love all of it, and I've just enjoyed every single moment of it. I love the movies. Maybe the reboot movies, Vicky, I'm with you. I think the first movie was okay, but then it just, especially what they did with Khan. I mean, I love Benedict Cumberbatch. I think he's an incredible actor, but to bring him as Khan, it just didn't make any sense whatsoever. That's not Khan for me. So that kind of ruined it a little bit. But the current era that we're living in, I gotta say, I am just completely pumped up because Star Trek right now is in a completely new renaissance. It's just series after series after series, and every one of them is just knocking it out of the park. I think we're living in a golden era of Star Trek, and I'm just loving it.
Oh my God!
I miss it. For me, the favorite ones I think were the ones with the paper mache boulders. That they would,
yes,
that's the original series.
That's the original.
And the Gorn makeup. I mean, the fact that in the Star Trek,
because for some reason,
wearing this green suit,
Yep.
For some reason, you knew it was paper mache, but it was okay.
Yeah.
You
bought it. You bought into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And
what I love about the latest series, Strange New Worlds, is that obviously Strange New Worlds is set 10 years before the original series. So it's set 10 years before Kirk and Spock and their Enterprise, but it's on the same Enterprise. Oh. So the crazy thing about it is obviously they have to film it to today's standards. All the storytelling, special effects are all, but they have to have the aesthetics of the 60s original. So they've got the flip communicators, they've got the tricorders with the leather strap. So it's so weird because it's like ultra futuristic, but at the same time kind of retro. It's kind of like jet futuristic. You know what I mean? It's it's brilliant.
That's right. And here's what. And here's what's really funny. When you guys were talking about the Enterprise, whatever the number is, 17, whatever, you were like, oh no, this is the one with the C, and that one has a D, and that's an A, and that's right there you go. We'll get a close up of the Star Trek Enterprise for everybody. There you go.
There's the NCC 1701, and that is the original one. And there's a wonderful scene in Star Trek: The Next Generations, which Vicky will know, when they recover Scotty. Scotty's was in a disaster, and he put himself into a pattern buffer on the transporter. So 100 years later, they recovered him, and he thought that Captain Kirk had turned up in the Enterprise, and he's he's a man out of time now. He's lost because everybody's dead, and it's not his Enterprise. He's confused. So they told him that if he goes to the holosuite, he can see a recreation of his Enterprise. So he's kind of drunk, and he goes up to his computer, show me the Enterprise. I said, which Enterprise? He said, no bloody A, B, C, or D. Show me the original Enterprise.
That's wild.
I remember that. I do remember that, man. Yeah.
But I noticed that all the Star Trek fans, and I have friends that geek out like you guys, they'll say, no, that's the 17 this, and there's a 17 that, and then there's this, and then there's that. But they also will tell you, like, if they talk about an episode, they'll be like, oh no, that's episode 126-3, and 4 pages into the script, I'm like, all right, calm down. Like I went to
I'm not that far
or whatever it's called, Comic-Con in San Diego once, and I was like, okay. Like, I mean, I like this stuff, but these people, I'm like, you guys are at a whole different level between the costumes and their knowledge. And then they would do Q&A set, and these people would ask these Q&A questions. And a friend told me, because he's been going forever, like the first couple Comic-Cons were kind of like interesting. He says, because they'd ask an actor a question about a certain scene in a certain movie or series, and most of the actors had no clue. It's like they don't remember. Right. And now when they go to Comic-Con, they know everything because they realize that the fans expect them to be just as geeked out on their whatever it's Star Trek, Star Wars, you pick it, that they are. But my friend said the first 5 years you would ask like a William Shatner or somebody, go, I don't really remember doing it. And he goes like all of a sudden year 6, it was sort of like, oh no, that was blah, blah. And it's like someone said to them, hey, listen, numbnuts, we're paying you $50,000 to show up. You better know stuff. So now when you go to these Comic-Cons, he says it's like talking to the Encyclopedia Britannica, like they'll go scene by scene, minute by minute, and the actors know as much now as the fans. And I thought that was pretty cool, but in the day it was sort of like, no.
To paraphrase him, didn't Shatner say something like, guys, it's just a TV series, get a life,
Yeah.
but to be
not
fair,
only did he say it, they made a documentary. They made a documentary about that as well.
But to be fair to the actors,
still paying his wages, isn't it? After all these years.
I tell you what, when you say live long and prosper, it applied more to William Shatner than it did to Leonard Nimoy, didn't it? And he certainly God bless him. But
it should be,
But the reality is that, at the end of the day, they were just actors, and they are just actors. They're given a script and they're playing a part. And a lot of even if you talk to Patrick Stewart, he doesn't know half of what actually scientifically is happening in Star Trek. He couldn't tell you what a warp engine is or how it works or anything like that. But he's acting. And it's great acting that sells the story, right? But the reality is that I think that we sometimes tend to take this stuff too seriously, and I think that it's all, we've got to remember it's all about the story, because there's a lot of things about what is what's the term that they use when something is, what's canon. They say what's canon and what's not canon, and it's a secret. So when you have the Strange New Worlds, which is sort of going back in time, but actually it's future, people are like, oh well, that's not correct and this is not correct, and like and you do get that feeling like it's just a show, it's science fiction, it's not reality. Right. Do you know what I mean? You have to give it that leeway and go, right, they're just trying to tell a story. Let them tell the story and just enjoy it. That's what it's about.
Right.
But that when they cross that line.
Yeah. But then we get fans like you guys that are like, it's more than a story. It's like, oh my God, right? It's like, and I mean, I enjoyed it. But
we talked about William Shatner, and William Shatner did come to Comic-Con in Dubai, and a friend of mine was running Comic-Con, and he got me tickets to go in and sit in on the talk and stuff like that. And when I was there, he was like, Shazad, do you want to meet him? And I was like, No, actually, I
Yeah, don't meet your heroes.
Yeah. Because
Okay.
I'd heard like he's a bit, and then because afterwards I spoke to one of the other guys, another friend of mine who was working there. He said, "Yeah, you didn't want to be him. He's a cantankerous,
Right.
old, whatever." But he's the thing that he did on stage, which he did for the
Right.
fact was brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
Right.
To watch him live, to see, and also I was lucky enough to see Patrick Stewart as well, also in Dubai, at
Okay.
Jumeirah. He gave a talk there, and honestly, like for a section there, they asked about Shakespeare, and he launched into a soliloquy from one of the plays that he did, and it's that same reaction I got where you just transfixed. I mean, the command that he has in his voice, the delivery that he does, the way that he'll hold you. I mean, it's just incredible what some of these guys can do, and no wonder we're so enchanted by these stories, because the people that tell them and the actors that portray them are just brilliant.
Yeah,
But they're
exactly.
real actors though, right? They're Shakespearean trained. They're not like, and I'm taking nothing away from an actor out of Hollywood that goes to whatever studio, but there's definitely a difference between reading something that William wrote, Shakespeare, than reading what I write for television or for a movie, right? So, and having to be on a Shakespearean stage where you actually have to pronunciate and also let it out, where an actor speaks into a little microphone, and it's still a lot of work. I'm taking nothing away, but I can see where, I've seen the Picard guy and stuff, and I'm like, he has that stage presence and he has that voice.
But also, here's the other thing, and guys, you're going to have to cut me off at some point, because honestly, like I'm on full steam here. But anyway, here's the other thing, is that you got to remember that when you're dealing with science fiction or even fantasy fiction, for example, the actors don't have a point to relate to. They don't have an equivalent in reality to what the lines they be. We're out in space. Oh, the ship is in warp drive, but we've got tachyon rays and the transfer. And it's like, there's no equivalent in real life to these things. There's no way of understanding like how a real human would react in that scenario where, like a method actor would be like, okay, let me put myself on a spaceship and deal with aliens. But you just can't. You just have to imagine all of these things. And it's amazing that, when William Shatner did actually go to space, and he was like, wow, I mean, it's the most incredible experience I've had. And he was so wowed by it. And you think, but you spent 50 years imagining that you're in space. And you've done
Iowa.
And to think, you take somebody like a Leonard Nimoy and you say, right, you're a Vulcan. And he goes, what's a Vulcan? He's got nothing to relate. What's a Vulcan? Oh, it's a green-blooded alien with pointy ears. But that's it. That's what I've got to go on, And then for him to embrace this character and to create the little, the personality traits and the nuances and the ideology and the character and the charisma. He had, can you imagine? He told, you're an actor and you must act these lines, but you can portray no emotion. Why? Because you're a Vulcan and they don't have emotion. Well, how do I do that? Do you know what I mean? So, So you're pushing, and you take somebody like Data from the Next Generation. You're an android, but you're like Pinocchio, really, because you're an android that wants to be human. So you're, the Pinocchio that wanted to be a little boy. Then he's like, okay, well, how do I do that, but also be absolutely brilliant at everything I do because I'm an android? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So to create this vulnerability in my character, but at the same time be perfection because I'm AI. If you think about it, he's AI. So. When you talk about actors and you talk about, of course, the script writers and the storytellers are brilliant, but actors really have to sell it, and they have to basically conjure this stuff out of thin air because they've got nothing to relate this to.
Yeah, and that's it's fascinating too how many things from Star Trek have come into reality now. Like you said about this is what science fiction does, right? But you're like, oh, we got iPads and we got these to be the controllers, and we got hyper sprays now. We have 3D printers that make your food. And, it's like, it's crazy now that we were at the time, when you see this stuff, it just seems so beyond reality. And now we're actually living in that reality. It's like, wow, I'm either really old or it's really cool to be alive now.
It's funny because I found something yesterday because I've always been into sci-fi and something flashed through my mind. And my first experience into sci-fi was through puppets. The first thing that really got me going was Fireball XL5, which I found quite by accident yesterday on YouTube. Look it up, guys. And then after that, we went into Stingray. And of course, Stingray then morphed into Thunderbirds. which of course was
I love
all my
Thunderbirds.
dreams.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
just think to yourself, well, again, you're talking about actors doing all these things, but they seem to manage to have great storylines with puppets
Yes.
because,
Mhm.
you know, we want to be in that story. We want to be in space. We want to fly that rocket. And, you know, I mean, I was just thinking, yeah, I like actors, but I watched some of it yesterday. I thought, well, I could see the strings, but for some reason or another, when I was 8 or 9, I didn't see the strings.
Right.
They weren't there.
But
It goes back again to great storytelling and great script writing, doesn't it? Because it just
The
and
suspense of
also a
disbelief.
your imagination just fills in the blanks, right?
Yeah.
But it's also
Well
a
worth
different
watching,
time,
guys.
though, because back then we thought that was all high tech, like
Yeah.
puppets on
Right.
strings. Like I remember the Thunderbirds and all that. Like we used to also
Yeah.
watch like Lancelot, Link's Secret Chimp, and you could see them whatever. And I'm like, as a kid, that was awesome. When I watch it now, I'm like, I really watched this. You know what I mean? So it's
Right.
a different mentality.
Yeah.
It's
But
and
it
I'm
was
like,
high-tech.
okay, but
It was high tech then.
back in
wasn't
the
it?
'60s, in the '70s, when we were kids, it's like, wow, that is really awesome. That's really cool. The
Yeah.
puppets, and now when you watch it, it's sort of like I said, you go, I watched that, huh? Okay. So it's one of those things. The other thing, though, when you guys are talking about great actors, I'm thinking maybe that's why when you look at the movies with Chris Pine, nothing against Chris Pine,
Yeah.
but because Chris Pine is not, let's say, Shakespearean trained, and these other actors aren't, when they have to deliver a speech, if you will, they're not delivering it the way a Shatner or I can't remember the guy who plays Picard, Patrick
he's,
Stewart,
Yeah.
delivers it.
So is
Maybe
he not
that's
officer
also the reason we
material
don't
then,
like
do
the
you think?
movies.
Do you think that's
I don't
it?
know.
Because it was they're quite authoritative.
I think
Okay, I
what
mean,
it is I think what it is with the reboot movies, and actually I think the reboot movies differ from the original movies that from '78 and the '80s with Shatner and Nimoy and the rest of the gang. I mean, there are scenes that you can. I mean, like I can remember dialogues from the original movies, because there are have these, these when they just sort of just thinking, they're just sitting there and they're just talking to. They actually have these moments in those original movies, which obviously reflects the TV series where they will just sit together and they'll just chat. I mean, there are these instances where you remember the dialogue and you remember what they said and you remember what the characters were saying to each other. The trouble with the reboot movies is that it was just basically Fast and Furious in space. It was like there's no time for characterization. There's no time for this. It's just like action, 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 explosion, 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 warp speed, torpedoes, phasers. That's all it is. In the second movie or the third movie? I can't remember. But by the third movie, they've destroyed the Enterprise. And you go, well, in the
I didn't even get that far.
Crazy. The Enterprise lasted. If you go to canon, the original Enterprise, not the A, but the original Enterprise, is supposed to have lasted 3 decades because it went through Christopher Pike and then Captain Picard, and then it was still around by the movies. It wasn't until Captain Picard himself destroyed that then they had to give him Enterprise A, which was renamed to existing ship. But when you look at the movie and you go, "What? They've so quickly developed these things. They've just rushed through this, and that's where they fail to have the substance. When you have, when Spock dies in the original movie, and you see the reaction from Kirk, and he's angry at Khan, and he does that thing. You go, well, there's 30 years of baggage there. Do you know what I mean? There's already that 20, 25,
that
30
gravitas is there.
There, we've grown up with the characters. So when one character feels the death of the other character, we feel it too, because we've grown up with those particular actors playing those characters. But when by the third movie, Kirk dies and Spock goes, Khan, and you go, that doesn't make any sense because we haven't had that much time with these characters, and why has Spock broken character? And and none of it makes sense. Whereas in the original series, there's a scene where, and this is going back to the original series, when Kirk has to be killed by Spock in a fight to the death that they have to do, right? And Spock thinks that he's killed Kirk, whereas McCoy just injected him with something to make him look like he was dead. And Spock comes up and he sees Kirk and he breaks out into a smile, goes, Jim, and that's the one time you see him break character. But it's such an epic moment because he never breaks character. And it's that one time that you see the joy on the Vulcan's face when he realizes that he hasn't killed his best friend, and so you get these little moments that they have gravitas because we've built up to that. There's a reason for that. There's a reason but when you have the movies and they just rush through everything so quickly, it's not really working. And I think that's why the movies have failed. The reboot movies have kind of failed Whereas the
Do you think
TV
it's
movies we're now getting,
Shazad, do you think it's bad acting or bad script writing?
I think it's bad storytelling.
with the-
I think that they're under
Yeah.
pressure with movies to make a Marvel movie. Every movie now,
Right.
every big budget action
Yeah.
movie has to be a Marvel movie, right?
Do
So
you think
there
that an audience can't sit long enough to listen to that dialogue in the cinema?
Well, I don't agree. So you take, for example, Star Trek: The Motion Picture. You remember that 1978,
Yeah.
I think it was, right? And a modern audience cannot sit through that movie. They can't.
Yeah.
Because it's a bit like Space Odyssey in 2000, right? It's just
Yep.
slow, long sequences. There's a 15-minute sequence of just Captain Kirk going up to the Starship Enterprise and gazing at it lovingly. That whole sequence just wouldn't exist in a modern movie. But in the original, it's actually one of my favorite scenes in the original movie.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, that movie came out in 78, right? So it was almost a decade or more after we had last seen the Enterprise. So Kirk is seeing it for the first time after a few years, but we're, as an audience, seeing it after 10 years. And we're
Right.
like, and don't forget, the Enterprise is as much as a star of Star Trek as any of the characters is. That's it.
Oh, for sure.
I think what was probably the essence of that scene then. We were supposed to also to be in awe of it.
Yes.
It's
yes.
great this how magnificent it was.
Right.
Yeah,
And but it was just the audience didn't go with that.
Oh, and to be honest, and the story again is brilliant in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. The concept of V'ger, which is a ship Voyager that we sent out and has now returned. The prodigious sun has returned, but it's so much more powerful. It's so much more knowledgeable, and we don't know what it is until literally we touch it. The story is just brilliant. But how long it takes for them to get there and to travel through it, is a modern audience just cannot sit through that. But for us, I still love that movie. I think it's brilliant.
I think too. Go ahead, Stephen.
No, go.
Kind of a tangent off of what I also think is kind of an issue with the storytelling and what's going on now is that we don't have Gene anymore. Gene's gone, and he's not overseeing all of this and the ideas and keeping track of what's going on. And so now kind of that carriage has run away without the horses, and it's kind of it doesn't have that person with the reins anymore.
Yeah, I think you're very right, Vicky. But don't forget that he actually passed away. I think it was in the 3rd or 4th year of Next Generation.
Yeah, but I mean, he had set up stuff and left things behind. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. But I think that what's happened with the TV shows that we now have is that they're being run by actual fans. Most of them, the people that are running those shows are people that also, like you and me, grew up either with the original series or with Next Generation, and they're bringing that element to it. I think the trouble with the reboot movies was that it wasn't done by a fan. It was just
a studio movie.
Okay, Star Wars is putting out movies, Marvel is putting out movies. We've got a franchise. Let's just do something with it.
Right.
I think it was just a desperation. It was like, let's just have lots of explosions and and lens glares and all of this sort of stuff. Let's just do that. Let's make it look sexy and have a lot of action in it. So I think that and this is not. I'm not being completely down on the movies. I do enjoy watching them when they're on. I will watch them. But except for the Khan one, I can't. I just can't. I just can't. What was the name of the original actor that portrayed Khan in the shows?
Oh, Ricardo Montalban.
Ricardo Montalban, yeah.
Oh, he was great. Fantasy Island guy.
And
he was great.
He embodied that character, and you just think that, to me, that is Khan, right? So I think you're very right. I think there was there's got to be a curator that kind of understands what Star Trek philosophy is, or what it's trying to show, or what the idea behind it is. And I think that if you lose sight of that, if you just go, oh, let's just pew pew pew, let's just turn it into another science fiction action thing, then you've lost it straight away. But you have to go back to basics and go, well, what is it about? What is it trying to say? What is it trying to do? And what it is always trying to do is to tackle questions that maybe some of us are afraid to ask about society today by putting those problems into the future and then trying to find a solution for them at that point. And we may not even often recognize what actually that's reflecting on. But many years later, like with the original series, we look back on it and we go, that's what it was talking about, So I think it's very clever in the way that Gene Roddenberry kind of started that thing. And I think the best curators of Star Trek are the people that understand that and understand that actually there's a subtext behind the pew pew pew. There's something else going on there that you're supposed to,
But also to your point of earlier, with all the explosions and the pew pew pew, there's no more cubics around. the guy, 2001 Space Odyssey. There's not that many filmmakers. I mean, what's his face, Cameron, that did Avatar, but Avatar, I just can't sit through because I'm just like, yeah, it's not working for me. The Muppets in Water doesn't do it. But I mean, it's just sort. I'm sorry, but I'm sorry, James. I'll buy dinner next time we see each other. To me, it's like you don't have Kubrick's mind. I mean, Spielberg does great, but his is, once again, except like maybe The Color Purple and a few other things he's did. But if you look at all the movies where they took time to build a character or for you to get really engrossed into it, it was all before the year 2000 and before social media and 30-second clips. And after that, it's sort of like boom, 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 boom. Like if we can't get you engaged right after the first credit, and like it produced by, starring, and then like Mission Impossible 7, like 10 seconds into it, you're already like on the edge of your seat. I haven't seen Oppenheimer yet, and I hear it's phenomenal, so I'm looking forward to see it. But once again, that is an old storytelling, right? It's going to take a while to build up to the climax. And if you read a history book, you kind of know what the climax is. So I think a lot of the storytelling today is they realize the fan, it'll give you 30 seconds, because most of them are waiting for it to come on streaming. I mean, I guess unless the Barbie movie, they all went to go see it. But I haven't seen that either. And I'm sure that started out in the first 30 seconds with a song or something. So that's the mindset, is like, we have to grab you either right before the credits or right after the credit and get you, as Mel Brooks says, for 90 minutes, or some are a little longer, until the ending credit. And then we have to make sure that you sit there so we can give you that last 30 seconds for what may be coming. And so it's a different mentality, I think, in filmmaking today. I don't think you see like we're going to tell, like in The Shining, we're going to tell you this story. We're going to tell you this. There's, I think, to your point, I don't think modern audiences today would sit through half of the stuff, even a Hitchcock movie, that they sat through 30, 40 years ago.
I think you've made some very interesting points there. And I think that it goes back to what you were saying, Vicky, about reboots. Yeah, exactly. Right. Give me a several pat on the back.
No, thank you. I'm done.
Literally, yeah. But it goes back to what you're saying about reboots and about taking existing stuff. So that and actually you got me thinking there, because if we think about what are the things that are succeeding at the moment, and you think, well, Mission Impossible kind of is really good, but Mission Impossible does draw on a heritage of stories that goes back to the 60s, right? And if you think it's science fiction, it's drawing back on that heritage, that it has, Star Trek in particular and Star Wars to an extent, to a lesser extent, but Star Trek in particular. And then if you think about what else? Marvels. So why is Marvel so successful? And because Marvels has 50, 60 years worth of comics behind it. Each of those characters that we've seen on the first time on screen, but actually if you think about it, there's a huge canon of storytelling behind each of those characters. And the people that are bringing them to the screen are actually understanding that and basically relying on that. So I think what's very interesting, what struck me, what you were saying, Stephen, was that it's not so much the laboring the storytelling, but the people that have come up with the characters and the stories and the situations have thought about it for a very long time. And this is also true of older movies, because movies used to take 5-6 years to get made, if you remember, right? Whereas opposed to now, where it's like, okay, concept, script, next year it's out in the cinema.
Right.
Whereas before you'd have these directors saying, I've been thinking about this movie for 20 years to get it made, but he's had 20 years to mull that story around in his head and to come up with the scenarios and the characters and stuff like that. And I think that that's what actually makes the stories compelling, because somebody's thought about them, or people have thought about them and worked on them for that period of time. So even if you may only see a fraction of the backstory of that character, but know that the character probably has an encyclopedia of a background that the writer or the script writer or the director already has, because they know where that character's come from, and that's what gives them substance, I think. So I think that's
And stuff's written by committee now, right? They don't have a writer; they have 27,000 writers that have gone through, a bunch of test audiences to see if they like the ending and all this kind of crap, and it just takes away from that. So
too many chefs.
Well,
exactly.
With the good thing right now with the writers' strike, maybe then we'll just get one writer. It'll be AI.
No, they're just going to pull old scripts from the 60s and just redo stuff and not write anything.
Well, I know right now, and we'll go off on a little bit of a tangent, and then we'll probably have to go. But I know right now the biggest contention is for the writers. They're saying, "What about AI?
Yeah.
Like you give us a script, you can literally plug it into AI. It'll make it better.
Yeah.
Who gets credit?
Yeah.
So we do AI movies on our channel, and we give credit to who wrote it. AI. David comes up with a concept, and it's like, Dirty Donuts, or the Twin Bloods, or Noisy Panda, whatever it is. We come up with a concept. It goes into AI, and AI gets the director credits. It gets the producer credit. It gets the writer credit because AI wrote it. We didn't do anything. We gave up with a concept. So the writers, that's their concern, right?
Yeah.
So maybe if they wrote better, I as a studio head don't have to sit there and go, oh, we need to do AI. The flip to that is an actor now is worried because they all want to do, they want to take your likeness and be able to use it for perpetuity.
Yeah.
So if I'm Tom Cruise, I can see where I would be upset because 200 years from now, I'm still making movies. My family may not be getting money. So I understand what they're doing, but I don't think, as Michael Eisner had the best quote in his Keys to the Kingdom book, and he said, cartoons don't need residuals. And so artificial intelligence doesn't need a residual or a percentage. And so Lion King, they all got paid their money. I think maybe they get, like he said, a couple percentage points, but they're not getting like 10 or 20 or whatever back points. So he's like, we made $1 billion with it, and we made $1 billion. It's not like today, if I'm an actor, I'm like, I need points on the back. I need this. So, I think we'll see how the strike on both sides ends up. But I think coming out, we're either going to get a bunch of schlock, which is going to be like the 1950 horror movie crap, or it's going to come out where we're going to start getting the William Shakespeare stuff again, because people are going to be like, I need to actually take pride in what I write, produce, and whatnot. So
I think these things go in circles, don't they? And I think that, as humanity, we're a fickle bunch. We get bored very easily. We like to move on very easily, don't we? And we get these periods like, so for example, if you take the whole Marvels thing, right? Marvel was doing hit after hit after hit after hit, but the last few movies have not been hits. So all of a sudden they go, oh, that means we're tired of them now. And this is us really. And at some point we're going to get tired of Star Trek again. And again, it will go into hibernation, and it will probably come back 15, 20 years after that. So I think that this is what happened. And I think what you're alluding to there is with AI sort of taking over a lot of this stuff. And I think that you're right, it'll happen. But it'll happen for a few years. It might happen for a decade, 2 decades. And at some point we're going to go, you know what? It's just same thing over and over again. Can we get something? And for that, then you'll have to go back to human intuition and human ingenuity to be able to come up with new stuff again. But I think that it might also lead us back to the realization that those original writers and the early directors and people like that had, is that we really need to think about this a long time before we, it's like a writer. I need to think about it a long time before I put pen to paper. Before I shoot that first reel of movie, or we don't do reels now, but first digital card of movie, whatever. But so much more thought has to go into it before creating that content, I think, rather than just churning it out.
Yeah. And Star Trek's already kind of like delved into this sort of whole, what is AI and what does that mean for us as a society? And do they have feelings? Do they have actual intelligence? Can they, have a rank? Can they have a this? What are their rights? What are, and all that kind of stuff. So like just go watch it. It's all there. Well, we know where it's going.
You're very right.
I'm going to upset everybody's feelings now, because I'm going to push the goodbye button.
All right, there, goodbye.
So, Shabazz, let's do it again. Let's do it again next month. Let's do it again.
Part 2.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, apparently there will be a part 2 next month, and we'll see if we can get some other Star Wars fans. Sorry about that.
Fans,
geeks, nerds, you know who you are. Yeah, you know what they are. And we'll see if we can get some Star Trek, Star Wars, and see if we can have a bigger discussion. But yes, it's always good to see you. Don't forget, you can catch Roz on his channel, Brown Car Guy, on YouTube. He's on Instagram. He hangs out with a few people you may have heard of, like Jay Leno. He also is saving London from pollution, from noise. If you don't follow him on Instagram, some of the funny stuff, he just did a Star Trek parody song with his dog.